It's time for today's face-off on Fox Soul. Challengers Quan LX and Big Angry Adams, ready to go blow by blow on those hot topics. Face-off on Fox Soul starts right now.
Who has been, who has interviewed Diddy and has had these connections with people in that music world. She's down there in front of the courthouse right now talking about this turnaround from yesterday. We went to, again, as Antoine said, you had two people on both sides of the aisle here, multiple people in part of the jury saying that they were not going to be persuaded. The judge said, you got to go back, you got to figure this out, and we came back with an answer this morning. So, Lisa, was there anything that surprised you from the results this morning?
Well, I think what was most surprising, Bianca and Antoine, was the speed. They came back today. Yesterday, it seemed intractable. The word was unpersuadable, that they could not be persuaded on that first RICO charge. And then all of a sudden this morning, what most people in the court thought was just another note from the jury about something, mid-morning, it turned out to be, we have a verdict on this one charge, this RICO charge that we did not, that they could not decide on. So that was a pretty quick turnaround. And as one former prosecutor has said, don't underestimate the power of a looming 3-day holiday weekend ahead. So whether that was a fact or whether they had already gone through so much together, because remember, they're all sitting through nearly 2 months of this testimony and evidence, pretty hard not to have some kind of an idea just on an individual basis of which way they were going. But quite a scene this morning and quite a scene right now. Let me just show you what's happening, and then I'll bring you up to speed with where we're at with Combs, who is still in a holding pen in the building you see right behind me. So let's just show you what's happening. Oh, now the bus is here. We'll come back to that, Roy. So there's been a big crowd. There's a huge media crowd in front of the courthouse, which has been for most of the trial, especially yesterday and today. And then what is happening now is the judge had asked for a bail package, and also comments from the prosecutors about whether or not they should grant Diddy bail. So he was found not guilty, as you guys were talking about, the RICO charge, the racketeering, which is also called the racketeering conspiracy charge. That was the most serious. He was looking at many.
In this round, here's Charles Big Angry Adams.
So we had a result. America had a result today on the 2-month-long prosecution of Sean Diddy Combs that was centered around a racketeering charge that he would have faced a minimum of 15 and a maximum of life in prison, and then 2 other charges involving the alleged coercion of prostitution that also would have left him facing 15 years to life in prison. And instead, he has been found guilty of the 2 felony counts, but on the punishment scale, much lower punishment range, which is up to 10 years in prison, 2 to 10, and on 2 charges, which the possibility exists that he could be looking at consecutive time. If the judge wanted to, they could stack it to 20 years. It does look like the federal sentencing guidelines, with his criminal history, would lack thereof, would direct it more to the lower end, and that they would likely run concurrent. And people are talking between 2 and 4 years in prison. I think that we'll see a presentation from the state, from the federal government, from the U.S. Attorney's Office there in New York, that will bring in a lot of things that were not admissible in the initial trial, but become admissible for the sentencing phase, such as the brutal beating of Cassie in a hotel and other allegations that would have been considered irrelevant and prejudicial had they been addressed during this trial. But clearly the prosecutors were aware that there was a significant problem. There are a number of charges abandoned before the case was submitted to the jury by the U.S. Attorney's Office, because they simply realized that they did not meet the elements during their presentation of evidence. This people are acting like it's a victory for Diddy, especially his family and supporters, and it most certainly is. Uh, I do think that he will emerge from this relatively unscathed. I do think he is, and obviously he will get credit for the time he's already spent in prison, or in jail, in detention, awaiting this trial. I also think that he'll get a bond. These cases, the ones he was convicted of, typically you're entitled to a bond. The federal government has already, the U.S. Attorney's Office has already pushed the narrative that he is a flight risk, but we're talking about an extremely wealthy man that returned to these United States to face these charges. When I mean, there are a lot of people that allege the Def Jam founder Russell Simmons is staying out of the country to avoid his own raft of allegations about sexual improprieties. Sean Combs did come and meet these charges head on. A lot of people are acting like he was exonerated. I would disagree. I think what we've seen is that Sean Combs is a pretty awful person who did a whole lot of awful stuff, and we've heard whispers since his early colleague Mace fled oddly at what seemed like the apex of his career to Atlanta to start a career in the '90s as as a pastor, right? We've seen other people in his life, odd things, scary things. We've seen, shooting incidents where other
Charles,
people have stood up.
How long are you going to continue bringing up salacious innuendo, hypotheticals about incidents he was not charged with, nor was he convicted of, Charles? How
But
long?
I'm talking about
You,
what's probably going to be presented at the
Charles,
sentencing phase.
not
I
gonna
get it.
happen,
He's a
Charles.
black man,
It's
so
not gonna
Quanell
happen,
X
Charles.
thinks he's absolutely incapable of doing anything
This,
wrong.
this
He's a
is
black
what I
man, so
believe.
Quanell will
This is
find
what I
some
believe.
way to
Charles,
rationalize him
you
standing
went
over a
on
woman
for
and punching him in
7
the
minutes.
face, where the
You
same
gave a
Quanell
7-minute
would
introduction.
condemn white men
You gave a 7-minute
for being
introduction.
born white. But go
You
ahead,
gave a
Quanell. You
7-minute
love to interrupt
introduction,
me,
but you're
please,
afraid of the facts.
Quanell.
You're afraid of the facts. You said on this show from day one, and you called this man a monster.
He is a monster.
On this show for day one,
And he's going to prison.
he would be found guilty, and
He
would
was
be
found guilty.
of the serious charges. I
These are
also said on
felonies.
the same platform with you, and I told you from day one they would never convict him for sex trafficking. They would never convict him with the RICO charge, the racketeering charge. I said that's something that they use for mafia bosses, gang members, and crime leaders. There is no criminal enterprise that they would prove that he was running. I also said to you that why do you think all of these people who partied in the sex offs with him, none of them were indicted as co-conspirators or co-defendants, but the jury saw the video you brought up that you claim the prosecutors and U.S. attorneys will now bring during the sentencing phase. That jury saw that video. This presiding judge saw that same video. They heard the testimony of Cassie, and they rejected her testimony. They rejected what she had to say. And that's why he was not convicted on the most serious charges. Now, if we're going to put men in prison for what he was convicted of, paying for prostitution, flying women in across state lines, paying for prostitutions. Well, guess what? Everybody in Hollywood will go to jail. Everybody in athletes in the NFL, the NBA, hockey, boxers, you name it, politicians would all be in jail. But what the jury did not accept, and what the jury said is that we will not be persuaded. What they were saying to the judge, you will not intimidate us. We will bring back a verdict that we believe is fair. This is a victory.
That's not what they
P.
said.
Diddy Combs.
Do you just lie all the time, Quanell, or just when you're defending an awful person that you happen to share a skin color with?
He was looking at life without parole. Guess what? That's off the table now. The worst he's going to get, no matter what it is, has an exit date. And because he has no criminal history, And because he turned in his passport before he ever was arrested, he turned in his passport and gave it to the U.S. government. Claiming he's a flight risk today is not going to work because it did not work in the beginning. He turned in his passport. P. Diddy did some horrible things as a horrible boyfriend to Cassie, but the jury rejected those who testified in this case to make this man out to be a monster. He did some bad things, yes, but he's not the monster the U.S. Attorney's Office tried to portray him as being. They overcharged. This was overkill, and the jury rejected it. And the proof of that is before they even gave it to a jury to deliberate, they start dropping charges because even the judge knew that the prosecutors had went too far. This case should have never been brought the way it was brought. Now, if they wanted to put him on trial for being a horrible boyfriend, a womanizer, a man beat of a female, he's guilty of all of that. But at the end of the day, that's not what happened here. They put charges against this man, hoping that the hard ones would stick to sensationalize somebody's career. And in the city of New York, I'm not surprised. In New York, I'm not shocked by this prosecution, but the jury stood strong. They rejected that. I think he should receive bail because think about it. He turned in his passport before he ever got arrested. He hasn't done anything whatsoever to make it look like he's a flight risk. Thirdly, the biggest fear to stop him from getting bail in the beginning was he would tamper with witnesses. He would try to intimidate witnesses. Well, guess what? All that's over with now. He can't tamper with no witnesses because that case is over. He should receive bond the same way other affluent white males are currently out on bond right now for paying for prostitution and other worse crimes. Give him a bail, then give him his day back in court, and let this judge decide based on the sentencing guidelines what he deserves. But at the end of the day, he will be coming home.
You notice how I waited till you finished with your spew of
You went on for
bile
7
and then
minutes. I didn't do
started
7
talking?
minutes.
Because that's
I
how
didn't do
people
7
have
minutes. You did 7 minutes.
conversations. But hey, look, he's interrupting me again. Hey, so well, let's talk about the lies. Initially, you're making it seem like I said he shouldn't be given bail, and when I began this saying
In
he
the beginning,
absolutely
you did
should
say
be
it.
given bail.
Before
I don't
he
know
was
if you're
found
having
not
a
guilty of
hard
the
time
serious
paying
charges,
attention,
you did say
Quanell,
that.
but
In other shows,
the
you said
words
it.
that I say matter. But let's go to the judge. You were falsely maligning this judge, and you were saying the jury said something that apparently you just haven't been reading about the case.
They did say
But
we
in
would not
fact,
be persuaded.
yesterday,
Yes.
the jury, I'm just going to keep talking. The fact is, yesterday, the jury sent out a note saying they were hopelessly deadlocked. And it was instead the judge who said, absolutely not, get back to work. And
they
if
sent
you
back
had
the
a greater
response, we would
familiarity
not
with
be
this,
persuaded.
the reporter who clearly did, so she made the point that oftentimes a holiday weekend has a huge impact on the negotiations in a courtroom. The jury tried to give up. The jury sent a note saying, hey, we've got people that can't be convinced on either side. There are people that are convinced he's guilty and people that are convinced he's innocent, and they won't move. We're deadlocked. And the judge said, no, keep working. So a moment ago, when you were making stuff up with your fabulism, I mean, the show is built around, and you were saying the judge did this and the jury did that, but it was absolutely the opposite,
crime, you got a
right?
problem with
So
it. He's guilty already.
What we have is a judge that sent the jury back to work. The jury went back to work, and maybe it was the fact that they were ready to go home after 2 months, or maybe it was that somebody had an epiphany and agreed. The horse trading that goes on in these jury rooms, which you're not technically allowed to do, right? You're not supposed to say, well, if you'll vote for guilt on this, I'll vote for not guilty on this, and we can go home. But there's a real possibility that sort of horse trading is what led to the conviction on the 2 lesser counts. They are serious counts, right? I know you like to bring in the specter of Whitey. Oh, all the white men do this. Well, the
white
truth
men
is
been holding freak-offs in Hollywood and in the music industry for generations.
Sean
ain't none of them been put on trial.
His
and you want the world to believe
like a criminal
that Diddy had
enterprise.
all these freak-offs by himself.
And that
these
the truth is there is a tremendous amount of evidence that he was trafficking narcotics for his freak-offs,
and the jury rejected those serious claims.
Coercive and abusive to women. But I will say that I think the only reason that this powerful, rich man who has enjoyed wealth privilege for decades, right, and fame privilege for decades. I know you like to pretend that that everyone is oppressed if they share an immutable characteristic.
No,
But
his money
Sean
played a
Combs is
big
quite
role.
the
His
opposite,
money
right?
played a
Sean
huge
Combs
role.
is someone that has enjoyed getting away with stuff for years and years and years because he was famous and rich, right? And
I
at
don't
the end of the
dispute that.
day,
I don't
it
dispute
all
that at
goes
all.
back to the government, the federal government, the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York being concerned with the video of him brutally beating Cassie and there not being consequences for that. That absolutely was the catalyst. Also, I mean, there, the whole Kid Cudi thing, which I will say the state didn't make their case, right? Did he burn Cudi's car and break into his house?
Had no proof. No proof.
Probably, right? Well, there was proof. There was direct testimony that he broke into Cudi's
There
house,
was no
right?
proof that
But I will
Diddy did
agree.
that. The jury
It's
rejected that
I will actually. They withdrew that arson charge before it
because
wasn't
they knew it
submitted
was a
to the
BS
jury. You really
charge.
should read stuff.
So you
But
don't think that the U.S. government in New York is embarrassed today?
oh,
All of them
absolutely.
charges they
And when
brought.
did I say that? I mean,
I
they
said, you don't
lost
think they're
on the three
embarrassed?
most important counts.
They should be
Obviously.
embarrassed.
But I don't think their embarrassment matters not to me, right? What I thought we were talking about was what we expect the consequence to be. I would be shocked if he isn't given a bond. I think because he returned to face these charges, he should be entitled to it. I felt like he should have had a bond the whole time. I believe in our Bill of Rights. I will be shocked if he gets more than 4 years in prison on both charges to run concurrent, not consecutive, which means at the same time. I do think there's a number of programs that he will qualify for in the federal sentencing guidelines and in our federal penal system
That will
that
reduce it.
because of his lack of a criminal history,
Will
that I
reduce
think
it.
he will be out in Senate very shortly, do the remainder of his sentence in home confinement. But there is the possibility, right, that they come in there with a wealth of stuff that was not able to be brought in front of the jury for the purposes of the sentencing, and the judge lights him up. We just don't know. I don't know the temperature of this jurist. I don't, he's going to be constrained by the federal sentencing guidelines, which do control sentences far more than like here in Texas, where basically a judge or a jury, if you opt for jury sentencing, which you can't do in the federal system, that he could, they can do whatever they want within the
Based on what we've
range.
seen
That
about
doesn't
this
exist in the
judge,
federal government.
but
What?
based on what we've seen about this judge, it appears this judge is really fair. That this judge is not biased for either side.
You were just maligning the judge a
No, I
minute
didn't
ago.
say that. I was not
Yes, you
maligning him.
did.
I said what the
Yes, you
jury.
did.
I said the jury sent back to him saying we will not be persuaded. But it appears that this judge is fair. Even the Combs
That didn't
family
happen.
has had nothing bad to say about this judge. So this is what I believe is going to happen. I believe that this judge recognizes, one, that the U.S. Attorney's Office way overcharged P. Diddy in this case. They wasted millions of taxpayers' dollars. This judge also, I believe, will recognize that this man did not participate in freak-offs by himself. And based on some of those factors, why is it this man was put on trial for these freak-offs, sex trafficking, conspiracy, RICO charges by himself? Like there were not other freaks freaking with him with these same prostitutes and male escorts. He wasn't by himself. See, that's what angers the American people. We know that Epstein was a freak. We know Epstein liked young girls. He was a pedophile on his island. But to this very day, nobody who was in those files, who went to the island, who had sex with those girls, have been tried. They put his assistant on trial, put her in prison. But all of these men and some women who freaked on Epstein Island to this very day has not been charged. The American people can see that all of these freaks at the freak-offs with P. Diddy, none of them were charged. The American people are sick and tired of being played by the criminal justice system, that some people are just too big and too powerful to be tried. So P. Diddy should not have been the only one. I've said it from day one. Should not have been the only one sitting up there by himself. And I believe that a lot of the jurors saw Cassie as a co-defendant, a co-conspirator, more so than a victim.
So it wasn't Epstein's assistant. I mean, she grew up very wealthy. She worked with Epstein,
She
and
was his
she
assistant.
was her. She worked with him to procure teenage women for him to do horrible things to, and she should be in prison, and
But
she
what about the
is, and
men?
she'll die
What
in
about the
prison.
men who had
Epstein
sex with them young
himself
girls?
died in prison, probably at his own hand,
No, I don't
possibly at
believe
the
that one.
hand of
I believe he was
people that
killed
were
in prison.
worried.
I believe he was
I think
murdered in
there is
prison.
I think there's very much a legitimate reality or possibility that Epstein had blackmail files and videos and all of these things that likely implicated Democrats and Republicans and powerful figures and heads of state and powerful figures of industry, titans of industry,
And
both in
that's what the
America and
American people
abroad.
are tired of. The
And I
elite
think that,
getting away with crimes that poor people go to jail for every day
well,
in America, that the elite are not prosecuted, but everyday American hardworking citizens, common people, poor people are locked away for the same
I mean,
crimes.
it's interesting you
Elon
bring
Musk,
this up as if Sean
Elon
Combs
Musk.
isn't
No,
a
but Elon
monster.
Musk,
There's
Elon
nothing.
Musk just suggested,
You're just
he just
maligning
hinted a
Musk
week
with.
ago that Trump was involved in the Epstein files. Elon Musk suggested that he had proof that Trump was involved in the Epstein files. Look, man, the American people are fed up with seeing rich people not be even charged with crimes, but everyday people be crucified by the same crimes.
So are
I
you
agree with
drawing
you.
an
I
equivalent
agree with you
between
that P.
Sean
Diddy got
Combs
off
and
because
Epstein?
of his
Because
wealth.
just a minute ago you were saying Sean Combs is this great guy, and it wasn't all.
I never
So,
said he was a great guy. That's a lot to come out your mouth. That's a common practice with you. I never said he was a
okay.
great guy. I said he was a horrible boyfriend. He was a
Okay,
horrible
no,
boyfriend.
you said he was a
but
bad
he was not guilty
boyfriend,
of those serious criminal charges.
but he wasn't all this other stuff. You don't
He's
think
not a
he's a
monster.
monster.
You want
So
to
when you
portray the
say
man
he's
as a
not a
monster? He's
monster,
no
what do you
monster.
mean? You don't mean he's a great guy. You just mean he's a bad boyfriend.
He is not a monster, brother.
Okay.
That's it for the Face Off on Fox Soul. We'll catch you next time.